Welcome back to Jacques in the Garden. In today's video, we're going to be covering a topic that I find to be one of my favorites, and that is how to care for and to use perennial herbs. In particular, we'll be talking about pruning, maintenance, refreshing, propagating, and I'll throw in a couple little use cases here and there as we talk about specific herbs. So with that in mind, let's get right into it with a couple of the herbs in this bed right here. The first herb we're going to talk about today is this wonderful looking pineapple sage right here. So I've grown pineapple sage a few different times, but I've never had it look so lush and vigorous and large. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the tips that I think I figured out from my previous issues. So in the past, I've had it growing in a about 2-gallon pot. It did okay, never really thrived that much. It never looked this healthy and this bushy. So I know for a fact that a bigger container, in this case, the tall 8-in-1 raised bed, is providing a lot more root room for it, and it's much happier here in this location. The other thing I've noticed is that when I've put it in ground is if the soil dries out, it really doesn't look that happy. Now, most sage prefers to be on a drier side compared to the pineapple sage. So the pineapple sage I found actually prefers a lot more moisture. Now, it can have too much moisture. For example, if you're trying to keep this as a perennial and you live in a climate that has a lot of rain, if it gets overwatered in that rainy season, it will probably suffer and die back, and you will have to grow it as an annual. Now, in zones 7 through 10, if you can manage that water, you're gonna have a plant that comes back every year, bigger and more vigorous every single time. So a couple tips to help you with that is to, first of all, isolate it so that you can control the water on it on your own. The second thing you wanna do is, if you're trying to overwinter it, you could grow things around it in the winter time to help soak up some of that water. This is one of these tips I provided for overwintering eggplant that work quite well. So the other thing I wanna talk about is how large this plant is. I knew that it could get really large, but in my personal experience, I've never seen it get this large before. So let's talk a little bit about pruning it and maintaining it and how to use those pruned off pieces. So if you take a look at any plant really, whenever you have these multiple large leaves coming out, in between them and the stem is essentially a sucker, just like you would have on a tomato plant. So if I come in here and I cut right above these two suckers, I'm now gonna produce 2 new branches that shoot off of it. So let's say I wanna stop it from creeping in over into this section and focus it on this side of the bed. Instead of just coming over here and chopping the top off of this, I wanna actually come down, trace it to the base where it's coming out, and snip it right there. So now there's no growth point down here that's gonna produce new offshoots. If I had cut it right here, I would have created a much bushier plant, which would have been counterproductive to keeping it out of this area. So I'm gonna come in here and prune off some of these other ones to try to get some control back and let this French tarragon here thrive. So here are a couple uses for your pineapple sage if you are pruning it or if you just wanna use it. It's fantastic in cocktails or mocktails. You take a couple of these leaves, you could just throw it straight in your drink, or you can muddle it with some lime and sugar. You're gonna get a wonderful, oh man, it smells so good. You're gonna get a wonderful pineapple aroma, but you're also gonna get a little bit of flavor of sage. It's reminiscent of sage. I wouldn't exactly call it sage. And the other thing we really like doing with this is actually taking a bunch of these leaves or just whole stalks and a couple bunches of tulsi or other aromatic herbs and throwing them in a jug of water, keeping it in the fridge and drinking that all through summer. It's really a lot easier to drink water when it's deliciously infused with something like pineapple sage. The last little bonus tip I'll give you is that if you're making a fruit salad, come out here, pick off a bunch of leaves, chop them up finely and throw them on top of your fruit salad, and you're gonna get a wonderful boost to that salad. It's really good with watermelon, it's really good with pineapple, it's really good with a lot of different fruits. And what you'll get is you'll get a little more texture because you have that leaf to bite into, but you're also gonna get that pineapple aroma and a little bit of that complex sage flavor. So it's wonderful in fruit salads, wonderful in drinks, wonderful in refreshing waters. But maintaining it and stopping it from creeping in is a great chance to actually make use of this plant. So here is some regular garden sage. All the tips that I shared about pineapple sage are essentially the same here, with the one caveat that this kind of sage that's sort of more succulent and standard in flavor tends to prefer less water than the pineapple sage. At least overall, it seems like the pineapple sage really actually likes more water. But man, this stuff is crazy fragrant. I'll put a link to the description of the seed for this one because it's extremely fragrant and high oil content. But again, if you do have the flowers, feel free to pluck a few off and use them in drinks because they add a lot of nice flavor. Now, when you have these kind of yellowing leaves, I like to just come in and prune them off. And otherwise, if you're not going to use the flowers, you should just snap them off to let the plant focus on growing its leaves. So let's go over and talk about this plant right in front of me. So what you see here is a plant that I was extremely excited for. And actually, I'm gonna change the camera so I can bring you in a little bit closer on this guy right now. So this sad plant right here is pizza thyme. It was a thyme that I was very excited for because I love thyme and I love pizza. And really what it smelled like in its prime before I transplanted it in here was a combination of thyme and oregano. So very delicious, very enticing. I was very excited to use it. But as you can see here, I'm not going to be using this anytime soon. No pun intended there. So let's take a look at why that is. And remember that things like thyme and rosemary come from the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean, you actually have a much warmer climate that has periods of hot, dry, and wet, sorry, I should say. So there's always like a break in between the rain. Here in San Diego, we're pretty much a Mediterranean climate, so we can get away with growing huge bushes of thyme and rosemary, but it all begins with how you start it. So in this case, this plant has a root ball about this big. When I put it in this raised bed, it clearly got overwatered. I could tell that right now by just digging in here. I have soil that's sticking together. It feels sort of damp like a sponge. And so what's happening is that this thyme just has too much water for it to be able to take in all at once. So in order to try to save it before I replace it, because I've never seen pizza thyme before, so I actually really want to save this plant, is I'm going to pull back all this mulch entirely. And I'm actually going to pull back a lot of this surface soil as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to dry out this area in particular more than the rest of the bed. And hopefully this thyme plant will bounce back. But I have a massive thyme bed over in the north garden that needs some serious maintenance and pruning. So let's go take a look at how to do that right now. Now that we're over here in the north garden, I want to talk about this strip of plants right here. And this is actually my herb strip, which is mostly perennial herbs. Right next to me over here is a huge smattering of thyme. There's 4 or 5 different varieties and they've all kind of blended together now. Some of it looks really good, but some of it looks like it's suffering from too much crowding. So let's get right in here, clean this up, talk about exactly how to do that. So here we are in the in-ground thyme bed, and I wanted to point out a couple of the things that I'm looking at here. So first of all, you'll see that a lot of this thyme is in flower. When you have a nice green looking thyme with fresh pink or purple flowers or white, this is actually a good stage to eat it at. It smells really delicious, extremely fragrant. And by the way, when you're harvesting herbs like this, you want to try to harvest them earlier in the morning after the dew has burned off, but not before the real intense sun has come out, because that's when they're most fragrant. But man, don't be afraid of using a flowering herb. A lot of the herbs that we grow in our garden will flower on a consistent basis, and some people think you can't actually eat them, but you totally can. You could use this in the exact same way. It might have a slightly different flavor, but it's gonna be very similar to be effectively the same. Another one that I'll just quickly mention right here is sage. And this is a variegated sage, which is why it has these kind of variegated flowers. So when you have a sage flower, this is another thing where you could just take this and drop it in your drink, and it'll add a nice sort of floral sagey flavor and aroma to your drink. That's kind of the best way to use a sage flower. But things like thyme, sweet marjoram, you could just use them straight up, chop them up, throw them in your dish just like you would anything else. But over here, what we see is that this thyme in particular is starting to turn very yellow and brown. So it's fully flowered and a lot of the flowers are gone. And so what's actually happening is that it's producing seeds. So they aren't fully mature yet, but I could see inside each flower is a little white dot, and that's the little seed forming in the moment right now. So we want to come in here and do some serious cleanup. Now, when you have a plant like this that's fully flowered, first of all, I can't even tell where this plant begins and where it ends. So I think what we'll do is actually start on one end over here, start trimming this guy up, and then move our way down. So the first thing we're gonna do is take a look at the structure of the plant and try to figure out exactly where it is and what growth belongs to it. All right, so I believe this is the whole plant right here. And what you'll actually see is that if you look at the under part of the plant, is that it has a lot of these dead branches. So right away, that's kind of the first thing that I'm gonna start getting rid of, because A, it's not doing much for me, and B, it's already creeping out into the area I don't want it to creep into. So I'm gonna just come in at the ground level and just prune these guys right off. And I bet you if I pull these, yep, I could feel a lot of them have actually already air layered. So this is a common feature of a lot of these herbs, in particular things like thyme and sweet marjoram. If they get buried under the ground, oftentimes by themselves, they will actually root. So in theory, I could actually take this, put it in a pot, and propagate it that way. So that's a method of propagation called air layering. But as you can see here, I have plenty of time, so I don't need to propagate anymore. But what I will do actually is come in here with my hands, and sort of rip up the earth because I want to make sure that I'm not leaving any behind because I already have plenty, like I just said. So I want to point out something right here in that if I were to cut this off entirely, there's a good chance that the plant would continue to grow from right here, but you don't have to take that risk. What you could do instead is just take some of the plant that you're fine with keeping. So let's say I want to just keep this over here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prune off this over here. And the reason why I'm choosing this one to keep and not that one is that I want to keep these herbs contained in this area rather than creeping that way. So what you'll see is that I have right here a 10-20 tray, just like you would have for your seedlings. And that's where I'm going to move my thyme so that I could dry it and save it for later use. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this other side because it's starting to creep in a little bit too much this way as well. So here's what remains of that original plant. So this might be one of the reasons why people will hesitate to come in and clean their thyme plants up because it just doesn't look as good now. But this is something that will pay off over time. If I prune this back like I just did, I'm now able to come in around the base, clean it up, add some compost, and this will 100% grow back just like it did before, and I will have plenty of thyme. I actually still have plenty of thyme on it right now, but here's what I get to now save and dry and have throughout the whole winter. But actually in San Diego, to be honest, this will grow year round, so I don't have as much use for the dried thyme, but I like to do it anyway for a quick addition on a dish that I'm cooking in the moment, and I don't want to go outside. So that's how we did this one. I'm going to speed through these right now, and if I find anything interesting, I'll be sure to let you guys know. On this thyme plant here, actually, it's a little bit different than the previous one. As you get closer to the base of the plant, there's actually still a lot of little foliage or a little bit of thyme leaves. They don't look like a thyme that I'd want to harvest and eat in the moment, but what the nice thing about that is that all of that is potential photosynthesis. So what that means is that instead of cutting it out at the bottom and leaving it high up here because there's no leaves at the base, I can actually just come in and just grab a huge bunch like this and just trim it right off. And now I've got plenty of growth down here that will keep this plant alive. So this one's actually going to make it easy for me compared to the other one. In the back here, I have English thyme, and what you'll see is that there's a whole bunch of this absolutely dead growth. So this is entirely just dead branches with nothing on it whatsoever. So I'm going to just come in at the base and just prune it all off. Well, this certainly looks like a very dramatic difference from what it did before. This was all entirely a bush of thyme, but now that we've cleaned it up entirely and we could access the bottom, the next thing I'm going to do is simply refresh it by adding a nice layer of compost. The compost should provide a nice steady source of nutrition throughout the rest of the season. And so we're just going to spread out, not a crazy thick layer, because again, a lot of these plants don't need that much. They are Mediterranean, they grow on very hard, barren soils in a lot of cases, where there's not a lot of access to nutrition. So I don't want to overdo it by adding a bunch of fertilizer. So I'm just going to be adding some of this nice compost. So here's an example of one of the bunches of thyme that I just collected. Now you can see that down here, it has a lot of this dead growth that doesn't have anything really edible on it. But up front, it has tons of nice edible foliage. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just grab the whole bundle like that, and we're just gonna trim it. So I didn't wanna do that on the plant because it would be a lot easier to just do it afterwards. And now I have a perfect little bundle of thyme that I could dry up and save for the season. Well, it's been 1 week now since we've pruned all these herbs back, so let's take a closer look at how they're doing now that it's been a week. This winter savory I pruned off camera, but you could see it has a ton of new growth. All this bright colored green material is new growth, and you can see this tiny little branch is covered in tiny little leaves. So this is about to explode. So let's take a closer look at the thymes though, which is the focus of that prune job. So you see I left a lot of this foliage here, and it looks really healthy. The reason why you want to leave some is that you want to make sure it still has the ability to photosynthesize. Now, as we move our way down, we'll see these other 2 thyme plants, or 3, I actually can't remember. And again, a lot of the foliage is still there, and there are signs of new growth. So right here, see all that bright green? That's totally new growth. So this is entirely new. All of this grew within that week period, and it's going to be shooting up. There's some more. So a lot of new growth is on the way. That's kind of the idea. It was when you prune back an herb like this, what it wants to do is come back to life. So it's going to spur on new growth. And in fact, you see this patch here? This is all the old plant that looks very dusty, but intermixed within it is this bright green. So again, we left this here to photosynthesize, but now it's putting out all this new growth, and that's what all that bright green is. So let's take a closer look on the inside of this one, which has a ton of foliage and actually has a lot of new growth. But I want to get in at the base there. So let's bring the camera in. So now we're looking at the very base of this plant down at the ground level, and all that bright green is new growth. So what happened was we hit this plant hard by cutting off a lot of it, and it wanted to regrow, and it did. And so that's kind of what you're looking for. You might not think that it's going to grow back because it's all woody and old looking down there, but the plant really wants to live. So it's going to do everything in its ability to send out new growth. But again, you want to leave some of the old growth to make sure that it has enough photosynthesis to carry out this new growth. The plant in my hands right now is sweet marjoram. This is one of my favorite herbs to grow. It does extremely well in San Diego, grows perennially all throughout the winter, and it will actually grow in the winter. So it's a wonderful herb to have around. I use it in place of sage, thyme, rosemary, savory, honestly a lot of different things. It has such a unique savory flavor that it goes well with so many different dishes. If you haven't tried it, definitely try it out. But one of the things that's really wonderful about sweet marjoram is it produces these flowers that are very clustered, and they are delicious. First of all, I chop them up and use them just like I would regular marjoram, but bees absolutely love this. So I have it right next to my bed here, and originally it was maybe one plant like this big, and you could see it's creeped and spread throughout this whole area. It is a little bit of maintenance to prune it back and stop it from creeping, but it's an extremely resilient plant that comes back every single year with delicious foliage and wonderful flowers that the pollinators love. I can't talk about perennial herb care without mentioning chives and rosemary. So we're over here in this other herb garden, and I want to talk a little bit about dividing your chives. Once the chives have especially blossomed, it's a good sign to it's a good time to remove them, first of all, but it's also a good time to come in, pop them out, and start dividing them out. By doing this, you're actually going to be creating more plants in the end, and you're going to create a healthier plant. So what we're going to do is just pop these roots out. All right, so there I have a nice clump of chives. Here's the central one where a lot of new growth is coming out of. These ones are actually pretty much isolated, so I'll probably just pop them in the ground as they are, and you could really get in there pretty rough. So actually here's one clump and here's a second clump. So what we're going to do is go ahead and throw this first clump right back in the ground. For the second clump, I'm going to try to split it into at least one more. I'm going to just grab it and literally rip. So now I have two separate clumps. I'm going to spread them out a little bit. That's all there is to it. If you wanted to propagate and move these chives to a different part of the garden, that would be the perfect opportunity to do it. While you're dividing it, just take one of those clumps, pop it anywhere else you want. Let's take a look at this rosemary right here behind me. When it comes to taking care of rosemary, remember it's a Mediterranean plant, very similar to things like thyme. They don't need that much water, they don't need that much nutrition, but when it comes to propagating it, there is a special tip to make sure that your propagation succeeds. It's actually pretty easy to do, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two cuttings here, and now I'm going to bring you in a lot closer so you could take a look at what the secret is to propagating your rosemary. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off some of these lower leaves just to show you guys what I'm talking about. So right there, you could see the stem on this young growth from the rosemary. Usually this occurs in spring. You could see it's not woody and it's almost kind of fuzzy and soft. This will root if you put it in moist soil or maybe even in water, but a moist soil will probably do better. Now, an example of what you don't want to use is a rosemary at this stage of life. Once it's become woody and has this sort of bark on it, this is going to have a very difficult time rooting, almost to the chance of it being effectively zero. So when you're picking your rosemary for propagation, and this is actually true for any herb, if it has a woody trunk like this, you don't want to use that, but if it has a nice supple green young stem, that's what you want to use for your propagation. For the final herb tip that I want to talk about in terms of propagating is actually dividing it similar to how you did the chives, but chives are a natural clumping plant. Things like sweet marjoram or thyme can air layer themselves over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to just cut off any of these branches that I see here. And I'm actually not really severing them from the plant. So what I'm going to do now is right where I cut it is shove this trowel in the ground, pull it up, and actually what you'll see here is a ton of roots. So this sweet marjoram branch went along the ground, buried itself, and actually rooted. So now what I have is a perfectly healthy transplant that I could pop anywhere in the garden. So a lot of plants will naturally root themselves like this. All you have to do is take a look at their base, and if they look like they're attached to the ground, then you have a good chance of just pulling them out like this, propagating them, and spreading your herbs throughout the garden. But that's all for this video today. I covered a few different perennial herb tips. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something along the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.